On this episode of the Emmets and ROI podcast, it's kind of a special episode. We have Alec Coleman of Coleman Web Designs, and Alec reached out to me on LinkedIn, kind of the right time, right place. I was just about to make a decision on a website designer as I was going to be finishing up the last leg of the long 8-month period of me building my business before it fully goes public and I really start going after it. And we got on a call, and immediately I started to kind of get an understanding of Alec and his business. And there was a connection that was made. I think it takes one to know one. And Alec really seemed like an authentic dude. You know, we just kind of hit it off, started talking, had a lot in common. I had taken a look at his website and the work he does prior to that, of course, and it was very impressive. And actually, he focuses on the type of market that my podcast audience is, right? He does a lot of work for SMBs as well as technology consultants of all sorts. So I wanted to give him the opportunity to come on because I think as an entrepreneur, he deserves the platform. We're going to do really 2 episodes here, actually, because just a moment ago, I actually signed my plan and began my payment process, and we're going to get going on it. So I wanted to do a before and after. So we're going to talk here before about the process and then give a full review after all the work is completed and go over how everything went. So before I go any further, I'm going to hand it over to Alec to give himself an introduction and sort of a high level on Coleman Web Designs.
Hey, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the chance to be on here, first and foremost. I started Coleman Web Design technically in 2020, but I guess legally in 2022. And before that, I was a software engineer for SAP, and I learned a ton there. Figured out I could work a lot of hours. Loved the people there. Just kind of realized that growing and climbing that ladder wasn't for me. And that sort of pushed me into different things. One of them being drop shipping, which is actually how I came about digital marketing online. I was simply just trying to make, some passive income like everyone else. And I ran into drop shipping, failed at drop shipping, learned how to build a website though, and realized the products I was drop shipping were $2,500, $5,000, but you're eating away at product costs, shipping costs, taxes, things like that, and then marketing costs. So very minimal profit in the end. And I actually realized websites are quite the opposite. It's very effective work that one can do through building an efficient website. It doesn't take that much skill. It takes a lot of effort, right? Being able to learn a different tech stack, learn something that you're kind of uncomfortable with. That's always something I've been very willing to do. Very curious in that sense. But when it came to starting Coleman Web Design, my biggest thing was I'd rather start sooner than later. So the minute that I realized I could build a website for myself, I tried to go and find someone in my hometown to build a website for. And I found somebody who just, they own it's a grill appliance. They resell grills, Weber, and really high-end grills and pizza ovens. They didn't ever have a website where people could buy products online through their website. This was 2021. And so at this point, I'm like, all right, well, they do offline. They do probably, close to $1 million a year in revenue on grill sales and grill repairs and propane and stuff like that. I was like, if I can just get them sales online, make it easier for people, that should make their sales go up. And that common sense thought process worked tremendously. I simply redid what I did for myself, but for them. They had high ticket products and so did I. And that's how I got into sort of knowing that I could do this for other people. After that, it became all right, I want to make a marketing website for myself. I made Coleman Web Design, and then I realized I may as well just turn this into an LLC right now, right? It costs $500 a year plus some money in fees. And I was like, it's worth it for me to do it. So by that point, I had built a marketing website for a startup or small business. And I also built an e-commerce site. Both of those things made me fairly confident that at the most basic level, I could sustain myself, right? Get work, even if it was 2 websites a month. And that's how everything started. I then just leaped into it. I left my full-time job and jumped into this whole thing. And from that point was forced to build a process, right? Had I kept doing things like off the cuff, like I was doing them, it never would have worked. So I did start to build a process, right? And what I realized was most important is people often overvalue perfection when it comes to starting their business. And simply having a website on Google for 2 years is going to get you better results than having a website on Google for 2 months, regardless of how it looks or how it performs in terms of your SEO or domain authority. It's just common sense, right? Now, through knowing this, I just started to realize I just have to tell people what I think will work for them. And based on that one conversation, I build a process for that project. And I started to do that efficiently. I started to have that one conversation with people that really gave me everything I needed to know. And then I would map out the whole process from there, which was discovery, planning, design, development, quality assurance testing, launching, and then post-launch quality assurance as well. I simply had a process where I took information, put it through a funnel of 7 steps, and out came a finished website. Very slowly, I just tried to fill in those areas of my funnel with people that did things much better than I did. So I hired designers and developers. And I myself, I've always been outgoing. I feel like I'm a people person and can communicate. So I've always taken on the client communication, the sales, the marketing. And my first goal was to get people that are just older, more technical, more experienced than I am at design, development, quality assurance testing, because that's most important when it comes to stability of a website. And finding that person for me, his name is Eddie. He's been, there's not words I can kind of say that give him value, right, of what he's done. He's pushed me to stay in this and not give up, but he's also taken less pay on projects so that I know it's worth it, right? He gives me his free time, things like that. It's just been awesome working with them. And he took over design development. And from that point on, I've been slowly filling in the slots of, who can do things a little bit better than me at maybe the client communication. Like before this call, Dan, we talked about sort of how I reached out to you on LinkedIn. That was one part of the process. Then we had a call. That was second part of the process. And that's all good and well. But then once we connected, the proposal, the invoice, and the discovery form, right? Those are things that I have not automated to this point, right? So Dan is a good example of someone that I'm constantly looking for of who does things like that better than me, fill them into my process, right? But for Dan specifically, for his website, it's going to be the same 7-step process that we take for everybody. It's discovery, planning, design, development, pre-launch quality assurance, testing, and then we'll launch the site. We'll change all the DNS records, all the back-end maintenance stuff that needs to be done. After that, we'll do post-launch QA. We make sure it goes live. Okay. The difference in our process, I think, and a lot of other people's processes is the standard of communication, right? And it's what makes things go very smoothly. I think it's what makes a lot of people want to work with us is simply, it's a simple process. We do require the other side to have a good amount of effort, though, because we want to do it with high quality and within their timeline, within their budget, right? So process changes for everybody, but those 7 steps never change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And you covered a lot there that I want to expand into each one of them. A few things came to mind. First of all, it was kind of hysterical that you were mentioning a grill sales company that was the first one you worked with. And we did not discuss this at all, but I worked for 9 years at a barbecue and fireplace retail center that sold barbecues, made custom islands for high-end barbecues as well as fireplaces. And they're actually now a client of mine. And it's just really funny that we have yet again that another connection there. And they have a similar thing where they've been around for like 35 years or more, I think, at this point. And they have they've just done very well and just executed for a long time. They have an area of expertise, but they have a tremendously shitty website and really no automated processes and things like that. And I'm helping them kind of modernize because they're like a second family to me. I basically grew up with them through my rebellious years, I'll say, even in my late teens to my early 20s and whatnot. So they're really good people, and I wanted to get in there and help them. I'm doing a lot of stuff for them, actually, at no cost, but I just thought that was funny. But aside from that, you mentioned sort of the getting started and jumping into the journey. So, and then you were talking about, how you went about that, the first steps, and hiring the right team and getting aligned with the right people. So jumping onto those two topics, the first thing I want to say is I have another guest that I'm working on getting on. It's another friend of mine, and he also has a guy that sort of has faith in what he's doing, works with him, and he's sort of doing work with the promise of the results because he believes in the vision, and sometimes not even taking, pay because they're involved in the outcome of the business, not just getting paid. And I think that whole passion aspect of it, the interest and the alignment of the identity of people is really what makes a business work versus someone who's just collecting a paycheck. And I recognize that within you in my first time talking with you, because my business is not some money-making venture. I could have done a million things to make a lot of money. I walked away from hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries and commissions, that I could have easily picked back up if I wanted to get back in the same game that I was doing. But on that note, I want to talk about taking the leap, right? And you said something that was funny, was you just forced yourself to have to respond to a commitment that you made. You just jumped into something and sort of set a bunch of responsibilities in front of yourself and said, you know what, I'm doing this, no plan B, just going in. So I want to just ask you about what was going on in your mind that made you make that jump, right? It couldn't have just been, I know you mentioned it wasn't the type of corporate ladder thing maybe you didn't want to climb as a software engineer. So what was going on through your head during that time where you just said, F it, I'm making this jump?
How much I was working for someone else. The biggest thing that I taught myself while I worked as a technical consultant, software person, is I can work a lot. I could work 85 hours a week and not bat an eye. And I did. And, I'm not someone who normally will, I'm more of a long-term person, right? A marathon, not a sprint guy. And I'm willing to sacrifice a certain amount in order to get that back in the future. I did not feel, however, for what I was doing and how effective I was and how much I was working, I did not feel that I was compensated fairly for it. I also feel one thing that's really important to say is I also started to understand my value and what I thought my value was. And realistically, when I looked financially at how much money I made working 85 hours a week for someone else versus the potential revenue I could bring in if I had my own company working 85 hours for myself, it would be unrealistic for me to ask them for that amount of a raise. I would basically ask them to 2 times my salary, right? And when I put all of that into perspective, is that good for anyone? Is it good for me to go in there and ask them for something like that at this age? No. Is it good for them to have to go through that conversation and potentially end up letting me go because that's my expectation? No. Right? And so what I did was I devoted myself to trying, keyword trying, build something that would sustain me. I didn't need something that at that time I was 23 years old. I did not need something that was going to build me the Taj Mahal, right? I needed a company where I could pay the minimal rent that my mom makes me pay because I still live in her house, right? And, go out every once in a while with my girlfriend and entertain myself and support myself, right? Obviously pay my debts and invest for my future, but that's not much. It's not much, right? I went to a smaller school, don't have the craziest college debt, don't have a massive rent that I need to pay. don't have kids, don't have a mortgage, right? Not married yet. So in terms of my risk, when I could take a risk, there was no better time than now. Putting all of those things together, it was a no-brainer. I did take a leap, but it was like, I mean, how long can I possibly fail for before I have common sense? Like, if I'm really failing, I will correct something, right? And not to my surprise, I did exactly what I thought I was going to do. I built a company where I now have a team, pay myself, and more than sustained. I'll turn 27 in August of 2025, right? So that was really it for me. Was I was working a ton, proving to myself that I could work a ton, work with tons of different people. I worked, working as a software engineer, a technical consultant. You work with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, right? Pakistan, India, Turkey, right? Other places in Italy. I mean, Denmark. You have so many different places there where you're working with people that I'm not really familiar with, right? I just graduated college, and it just proved that I could get a little uncomfortable, right? That I had a good, pretty nice skill set. And, again, after putting all that information together, I could kind of just realize that I would be stupid not to try this, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not committing to doing this for my entire life, regardless of if it works or not. But I'm definitely going to regret not trying this if I don't try it. So, I always hear from people that are very successful, like, go all in. If you're going to try it, right? Don't just dabble in it, like, really try it. And that's what leaving my job meant, right? Like, I would have been dabbling in my web design company had I continued to work 60 plus hours a week for someone else, right? And yeah, so the time.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because I'm listening and I'm like, I'm seeing so much, and it's not that I'm significantly older than you. I'll be 38 in June, which is, I don't know if you can see the sheen of my gray hairs coming in here, but I'm thinking about myself when I was 20, 26, 27, and it's funny because while I may have had certain talents and skills, I did not have the mental maturity that you do, nor I'll say the wisdom or courage to take that sort of a risk, as well as to do it in a humble way of knowing, what your limits are and build out a team behind you, and to do it the right way. Because I think a lot of people tend to take on everything for themselves and need to have this control in the business and have an unrealistic sort of approach to things. This is going back to earlier what you were saying about, the services I offer. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because this isn't about me, but you were talking about, the managed customer lifecycle and CRM that I do, because just prior to this, we signed an agreement, right? We set up a recurring payment because I set up a small payment plan, as well as sending out, an Adobe DocuSign type thing, and then followed up with another form and a document there. And what I was explaining was, part of the services I do is business automation, whereas instead of you manually doing those 4 or 5 steps, all you would do is simply add them into a campaign that I would pre-build for you that would execute every single one of those things for you and only transition to the next stage once that goal had been met. And if you multiply that times, 15 clients in a month or 15 transactions, you save a tremendous amount of time and you can focus on the things that you want to. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because you've done that with the team in your business. You've rerouted yourself to the areas, like you said, that you are great at and you enjoy, which is being the people person and running the sales process, running the discovery, and sort of orchestrating the whole matter, versus sticking in the day-to-day. And that's something that I don't know that everybody has the awareness of, because most people, they're good at something, right? They are amazing website designers, so they start a website business. You are a little bit different, whereas you were seeking the business outcome to build something, realized you were good at website design, and then built a business around that, which is very much similar to myself, where I had no intentions of being a technology advisor or a managed service provider, but I'm a problem solver and a communicator. So I get in there and I learn from people about what's going on in their business. And my brain is just wired to make sense of chaos and make it work for them. So we both kind of are building and have built something that's of a very similar structure. Although my life is a little bit more obligated than yours with a 6-month-old or now 7-month-old little boy, and I am married and I do pay for a house. So like things are different, but we still have the same commitments. I just wanted to highlight that because it seems like you enjoy the business building it, and there's something innately personal about that. It doesn't even seem, while it has like a financial rooting to it, you're like, I'm worth more than that. It wasn't, I want $1 billion so I can buy a yacht and a Maserati. It was just like, I know I'm worth more than that. So I want to build something around that that recognizes who I am, that I can expand into, rather than being limited and trying to focus on just my software development, when I'm guessing that that wasn't the only problem that you had. I think you probably, and this is an assumption, thought outside of your role, responsibilities, and lanes. Like you are somebody who sort of sees the big picture. So you probably get stuck. I think we lost Alec here. Alex's computer died. So we've jumped back on after recharging, and we are all set. But I think where I was going in my typical rambling fashion was talking about how Alex and myself and many entrepreneurs kind of find themselves in the positions that they are, not just because of things like money or some other ulterior motive, but because we're just conditioned naturally to think that way, where he sees outside of his role and finds more fulfillment in building something than simply following orders, for lack of better terminology. So I wanted to get his perspective on what he thinks about that and how he sort of naturally thinks and acts that way, and the fulfillment that comes along with being an entrepreneur, before we get into some of the more nuanced discussion about what exactly Alec can do for his clients in terms of website design and features and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think this would be a good time for me to expand back into my athletic career. I've always played multiple sports growing up. Before I hit high school, I think I literally played 7 or 8 sports, everything from football, baseball, hockey, basketball, but also like swimming, karate, like just some outrageous things. But when I went to college, in high school, I focused on football, and same approach that I took with my business, which was like, if you just break down what you sort of need to be really good at and you just focus on those couple things and just like block out the rest of the noise, it's actually pretty easy, right? Like you just have to do more than most people and you perform better than most people. And that mindset for me obviously made me a better athlete, just kept me calm. I knew I sort of put the work in to be where I was, but I also knew that like a lot of kids didn't put the work in, right? And naturally, just athletic ability, if you didn't put the work in and I did, right, I was probably going to beat you, right? And so like when I took that approach in sports for so long and it worked for so long, and I went to college and, I played on a college football team in Springfield, Mass, with 140 kids, and my senior year, I was the one captain. There's just one guy that walks out for the coin toss, right? And that was me. And like, how did I get to that point? Did I ever see myself getting there? No. But I just kept doing what like was like natural and simple to me. And it just built muscle memory. Like when I left playing football and I got a job, I was like, all right, like I'm just going to do all the simple things insanely well. Like I'm going to know how to use Excel better than 99% of the people here, right? I'm going to know how to use SQL. I'm going to know how to transfer something onto a document. I'm going to know how to snip tool something and put an image onto a doc or create a quick video. I'm just going to do the simple things really, really well. And what that created for me was just this sense of like how valuable the simple things were and how many people don't do them. And that's sort of that. Playing sports is like having that mindset made me a better athlete. Being a better athlete gave me leadership capabilities, and having leadership capabilities meant people looked up to you. and having people look up to you means like you have to be able to lead them in a non-selfish way, even though sometimes like you're pissed or you're really happy. And either one, you don't think it's anyone's fault, but you know what I mean? Like, but your own. And you need to figure out sort of how to just put yourself in their shoes, think outside the box a little bit.
It's responsibility.
Exactly. And like when it came to work, it was just like, you know, I need to be able to do the simple things well. And I did the simple things really well at SAP. And when I left and I did my website stuff, I did the simple things really well, right? There's not many people I know who own a company that communicate more efficiently than me. I communicate in minutes, right? It's not hours or days. At this point for me, it's not like the small company that we started with, right? Like we build, 50, 65 websites a year and it's a lot of work, but a big reason why I get a lot of referrals is because of how efficient I am with communication and how genuine I am with conversation and things like that. And like, those are simple things that everyone knows how to do, but they don't do them well. They don't focus on them well, and they don't practice them. Everyone, practice makes perfect. Everyone knows that, right? They don't want you to preach that to them because they feel like they know that, yet they don't practice it.
Yeah, and they shouldn't be taken for granted either. And I can attest to that because even when I was just I'm looking at my other monitor here, when I was just signing the agreements with Alec, although we're very friendly and we get along very well, he still conducts himself in a very professional manner, and he was outlining the requirements that it is to be a client. And he was saying, like, this is what I expect from you. This is what you can expect from me. I expect responsiveness for you. And like, having that control of this business, it shows me that he has the sort of grip on the process that's going to unfold. And it only gives me more confidence in him. And I'm sure that it keeps sort of the reins on his business in terms of keeping his business in order and not getting out of control, which I guarantee translates to a better customer experience across the board.
Yeah, for sure. And it's weird to think, but it all goes back, like, where do I learn that stuff fundamentally and habitually practice that day after day? It's through sports. Like, at least that's what it was for me, right? It was just like doing it all the time. I mean, truthfully, at that time, I was young and wasn't making money from it, right? But it wasn't work for me and my friends. Like, we loved playing football, right? And then like we just became a little bit better over time. We just kept doing it. When you look back, it's like, why were you guys good? It's because we just did it for a long time. You
learned discipline. That's what it was. And I had a very similar thing in a different aspect. Although I am, relatively athletic, I didn't have the interest in sports because I wasn't, competing. At the time, I didn't really understand competing against myself as being valuable enough. And for whatever reason, I didn't feel like sports and the whole interpersonal competition just didn't appeal for me. And not that sports is entirely like that, but I was more of the building my own discipline and my own skill set and learning some of the similar parallel set of, we'll call them virtues, through like academics and learning and books and stuff in my own time. So I built that same work ethic is what it is. Right. It's work ethic. It's reliability. It's responsiveness. It's ultimately responsibility for the outcome that you feel, not only for yourself, but the people under you, as I do for my own clients and the people that I will be hiring once I get to the point where I can be doing that. So I think I'm always trying to tie in the various different guests that I have with other people and relate it back to myself so we can draw these sort of interpersonal and we'll even say existential type of mechanisms that like rule people as overarching qualities, rather than saying like, oh, well, this person's, an actor versus this person's an athlete versus a scientist. Like, I just don't believe that. I just believe that people in general have these commonalities that are these like striations in personalities and characteristics that are way more common than they are not. So I'm always trying to pull that out in my podcast with other guests. But before we get too frayed, because I know we've gone on for a lot, and I think you're very forthcoming from a personal perspective, which is very welcoming and it's awesome. but I want to make sure we also, of course, touch on exactly what it is Coleman Web Designs offers and can do from a performance perspective for your clients. And again, I've taken a look at various websites that you built, and I'm sure you have way more than that. But as I'm building my website map, I'm referencing things that you've done to build out what it is that I want from you to make it very clear. But can you just talk about, sort of high level as well as nuance? Like, what are some things that people typically ask for that you can do? What are some things that maybe you can do that others don't ask for? Some unique capabilities or anything like that? Just talk about actually the execution of the website. What do you can make it look like? What do you can make it do so people can understand?
Yeah. So in terms of execution of a website, like that's our bread and butter. Right. I'm fairly confident that I don't need to talk much about that because anyone that would come and see our work or get work done from us would know right off the bat that we do good work. And anyone that has gotten work done, by us before has either left us a review or would positively refer us, right, to anyone that asked. But we're like, again, discovery and planning, we don't just check the boxes, right? We actually it's a very genuine conversation. And my biggest thing is why do people want to do it? Right? That tells me a ton about where you are and what you're going to achieve is the why. And oftentimes people just tell me the what and the how. And, I just want to know the why. That's my discovery. It's why are you doing this? And that is a lot different than what people, at least that I've gone around when I sort of quote shop for different things. That's certainly something that I think I do a little bit differently, but that's, again, habitual for me. How can I help you if I don't know why you're trying to do what you're going to do, right? It's just a fundamental question, right? And planning is a necessity because, right, all things that aren't planned aren't tracked. And if you can't track something, you don't know where you are, you can't get better at it, right? This and that. And the discovery and planning phases are where we execute at a very genuine level when we build a website, right?
So hold on. Sorry, I apologize. I want to stop you just because I want to encapsulate, the transition between my question and your response so you can continue on. Is basically what Alec is trying to say is we can do whatever the hell you want. We can get it done. And the features and the functionalities are not what people really need to be paying attention, because I asked him the same questions. I'm like, hey, can you do this thing where it does that? And he's like, yes, of course, no problem. So in essence, what he's trying to say is, don't worry about that. We've got you covered. What I want you to know is this is how we go about things, and this is really where we're going to stand out. So I appreciate that. And I just wanted to kind of preface that before we go further, but also make the correlation between what you do and what we do. What a large portion of my audience is, you're not selling on the features, you're selling on the outcomes, and you're starting with the why rather than, hey, this, car can change gears faster. It's no, this car will get you the status that you want or whatever, for a very rudimentary and terrible example, but that's what you were it's basically what you're trying to say is I focus on helping you. And it only goes further in testament to saying why you do good work is because you're passionately involved in the outcome and understanding the underlying motivations. And then you're yeah, let's get you done what you want done.
Yeah. And it's funny because it goes hand in hand, right? It's very genuine. It is when you get to that level of why someone wants to do something, but it's absolutely critical for me, right? It's critical. I need to know that information. So a lot of people don't go into that depth. I do because I need to know that information to input that into my analysis in order to figure out a plan that will most effectively drive you forward, right? It's it is emotional. It is genuine because you have to, sometimes it's a very emotional conversation on why someone's doing something, right? They lost a job or things like that. But it's a critical piece of information for me that I analyze, right? And I see how can this drive our goal moving forward. Now, design and development, like I said earlier on in this podcast, right? My job is to understand what needs to be done, how my client wants to do it, what the timeline is, what their budget is, and then get it done effectively. So I found people that were within my budget that did design development much better than me, and I built a 2.5-year relationship with them at this point, and things are thriving. They have never, ever been able to not do anything related to a client of mine and their needs when it comes to a website. Never. They are always able to figure out the problem. Sometimes it requires an add-on, a paid add-on, where it costs you an extra $5 a month or whatever it might be for a specific request. But they've never been able to not solve the problem, right? Like that's what we do, is we solve problems, right? We don't sell websites. Like we provide websites to people, right? We solve problems. That is the service that we sell. Every single client that comes to us is at a different stage in their journey with a different problem. We are familiar with how to solve each one of those, and we meet the client there. We solve that problem, how we know how to solve it with the team that we have, right? So that's a big thing as well, is like when I realized that we didn't sell websites, we solve problems, I started to get recurring revenue for people for $400 a month just to be in their pocket and respond to emails. And it grew my business, right? It was massive, massive. And not only that, but like that is why people love you as a product or a service owner, is because you solve their problem. Like there's 1,000,001 people, probably 1,000,000,001 people that sell websites. 95% of them do not solve your problems the way you want them to be solved.
It's funny because we were talking earlier about, just go to market and business in general. And I was asking Alec about, being on Fiverr and whatnot, because I use Fiverr, occasionally for jobs. It's really shocking to me that only a very small percentage of people on there, although it is relatively a transactional platform, you're paying for a service, you get it back. And that's sort of how it's designed. But for instance, I got my logo down there, and I only chose to work with someone because they offered a video consultation, and I paid an additional $15 or $20, whatever it was, to make sure I can meet with them and have a conversation with them. And if you're not getting involved to have that conversation, to understand what are the underlying reasons, to get the motivation, the inspiration, to be able to pull out of your own self your potential to execute for the client, you're not just nowhere near as valuable to anyone else. And perhaps maybe I'm different, but I don't think so, because the entire basis of technology advisory, as well as managed service providers or anything like that, or even being a SaaS provider and ISV, is you're solving a problem. And this is something that I've talked about with many people on my podcast. To highlight would be, Graham Scott at Solaris, when we're talking about going through the exercises of learning how to sell new technologies. You're not learning how to sell and describe a feature. You're learning how to understand what the problem is, to position the outcome, and then revert back to how the feature will apply to solving that problem. And I think that is something you're very eloquently and innately geared toward determining and then executing on. But I know we had the issue earlier with the computer going on. I think you said it had another 15 or 20 minutes on your battery. We are about 18 or 19 minutes into the take 2 of the podcast. I wanted to ask, do you have anything that we haven't touched on today that you would like to spend a few minutes talking about before we close it out? And again, keep in mind, for both Alec and guests, we are going to do an entirely second episode to this after we've completed the work to review everything, the whole process. I'll give my thoughts on the whole process. We can take a look at, the outcome of my own website so you can see that all happening. But before we end up closing out, Alec, give us whatever you think we missed that we need to know about you.
Yeah, I think we covered pretty much all of it. I think we have another one, like if you ask me this the second time around, I think I'd have a lot more to say, like on our second podcast. But, here's my biggest thing. My most efficient projects have come from people with the willingness to put in effort and communicate with a reasonable timeline. That is always when I have the most success with project outcomes, website outcomes, search engine rankings, client success, just all of it, right? And those things are both very simple. So one thing that I always will harp on, and one thing that my college football team was founded on, was you do the simple things savagely well. And if you can, you will stick out. Like if you can be consistent just doing the simple things better than everyone. Every single week, I run out of LinkedIn connection requests. Everyone knows how to log into LinkedIn, find the person that they want to target, and send a connection request and a message. But not everyone runs out of connection requests, right? So it's like the simple things that you need to do, just start doing them. 2 years from now, you'll be in a much different place. Your problems are not going to be, right? Like, they're not going to be, how do I start this business? They're going to be like, how do I hire someone? How do I make an SOP document? How do I automate marketing? And those are better problems to have, right? Everyone walks up a 10,000 step ladder. It's better to be at step 10 and have the problem that comes with step 10 than be at step 1. Like, it's just how it is, right? Like, you got to get to step 10 eventually. So you may as well start. And a lot of people, they don't start because they seek perfection in a certain thing, but people don't look for perfection. People look for someone who's genuine and commits to them and shows some effort. And those are all things that are very, very simple, right? That I'm sure every person that watches this has been told time and time again, and has probably told someone else time and time again, right? But truthfully, I mean, there's too much tech out there nowadays. There's too many people that are, before, that came a long time before my time, right? And have more like hands-on experience with coding and how the software works and how the tech works and stuff like that. Like, there's very, very smart people out there, and there's tech. So everyone, like, you can build a website if you've never built one before. It takes about 12 minutes on YouTube. And then if you're willing to spend $400 a year on Squarespace, you learn how to build a site, right? But if you get really good at that process, and how do you just take that simple feature of building that site and charge someone a lower amount, but it's still very effective, then the word starts to spread, right? And like, things happen when you do something with intent, right? And like, well, like you said, passion and purpose, more so than just the financial benefit, right?
Yeah, I wish these conversations can go on for a lot longer, because I constantly think about new segues into new topics, and I keep thinking about this term multi-potentiality, which is a term that my friend Anthony Labasco, who I hope to have on the podcast at some point as well, presented to me. And it just means someone who's capable of doing many different things. And it creates an opportunity in various aspects, because you just understand underlying principles and value, and you have underlying talent, rather than just feeling or being determined in one space. Like, you just understand how to get shit done and what to do, and you care about getting it done and the quality of the work, and you have talent that goes behind that. So like, I think that's something that creates conflict as well within someone, of not knowing which path to take.
Definitely.
And it sometimes also creates maybe sometimes like a little bit of doubt. It's like, hey, am I reaching my potential? Am I going down the right path? And I think there's a certain level of meeting people like yourself that gives me comfort in that same sentiment to keep going, because you're like me, and I think we're both doing the same things. But then there's also, I don't know, I'm not going to jump into the next thing because we don't have a lot of time. We'll cover it on the next one. I'll put a bookmark in it. But
we can even do maybe like a halfway one too, right? We can talk about a third maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, no, we definitely can.
Yeah,
I'll stitch them together. I write these articles on them, so we're gonna really detail it and pick it apart. Giving me a lot to work with. But Alec, I owe you some things within a couple of days, and I'm really looking forward to see what you can do for me, and I hope that you get a ton of exposure and a lot of business from this podcast.
And thank you very much for having me on. I look forward to working together. I know that we'll crush it. We've talked enough to sort of familiarize with each other and know that we're on the same plane. So we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Alec.
All right, man. Take care.